we have no particular kind of script for this conversation. I mean, we're both writers who have published with very conventionally mainstream mega corporate presses, and also have done what I guess would fall under your category of artist books, and so that's a kind of maybe we could try and kind of trace the the kind of trajectory from one to the other, or the differences between them. But I mean, I guess we met at this discussion that Hans-Ulrich Obrist convened in Cagliari, right, in Sardinia, at an architecture festival. But there was a group of writers who'd been invited, and one of the figures at the table was Vito Acconci. And he was very interesting. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew Acconci's work, very text-based performance art practice. But what I didn't know about him, he said something very interesting there, which was that he wanted to be a writer. He started out writing, and he went to this program in Iowa, which is now the most kind of conventional mainstream factory for producing kind of sub Raymond Carver kind of novelists and short story writers. But Acconci was one of the first year, or one of the early intake of that program, and he said everything would have been fine. He was progressing fine until he read Mallarmé. That was his big mistake. He read Un coup de dé, A Throw of the Dice, this seminal 1897 work that we could describe it as a poem, we could describe it as a manifesto, we could even describe it as a piece of visual art. It's a pity we don't have a picture of it here, but I'm presuming you're kind of familiar with it. I mean, Derrida's idea of spacing owes a huge amount to this work. It's full of spaces. I mean, it's unclear how you even read it, in what direction you read the words, whether, I mean, there clearly is a narrative in it. There's a shipwreck, there's a captain sinking, but at the same time, there kind of isn't a narrative. Nothing will have taken place but space itself. It's an amazing piece of work. Anyhow, Acconci reads this, and he's kind of fucked. I mean, from that point on, as a writer, his conventional writing career is over when, at the age of only 24. And he says from then on, he decided it's not enough. You can't just write after Mallarmé. You've got to kind of somehow enact the possibilities of space. And for him, art then becomes the place where he can do this. I mean, he spends the next 20 years or more doing very spatial artworks, moving around, kind of like Yves Klein and his judo mats, moving around white spaces, iterating words at different points in that space. A very kind of, you can see the logic of Mallarmé's work in it. When we met him, he'd even moved on from there, and he'd become an architect. This is his practice now. He's an architect, but the concern is exactly the same. It's a literary concern. I mean, that hasn't changed. And so maybe that's maybe this is kind of pertinent in terms of this context we're talking in now.
But do you have this feeling, you really, when you do things in an art context, do you have this satisfaction of entering space?
Yeah.
I must admit I don't have at all. So for me, this is really the big obstacle of doing something in the art world. I'm attracted by other things, but definitely not by the space. I mean, I'm even, it's horrible. I think every time I got an invitation or it came up and doing something, it was horrible that you would, there are all these progressive ideas around in the art world, but then you end up filling a space. And it's really this ritual. It's as well, for me, it's as well a problem when it comes to artist books. As Angus said, who are the proper people buying and assumingly reading these books, and it's more this whole production of artist books, it's more, yeah, it feels more like a ritual, and it's more about, yeah, as well, about space. The volume of the book, yeah, of course, it has to have proper words in there, otherwise it wouldn't be a proper book. But what counts in the end, as well, when Lindsay was showing this endless shelf with the copies of the book, I mean, this is really, when you perceive this as a writer coming from the literary world, it's just like, oh God, all these books are somewhere. There has to be someone found who actually reads them, but.
Sure. I mean, yeah. This is another. I mean, there is a problem of a kind of ghettoization of artist books. You know, we were saying before, when Japanese businessmen meet, they give each other immediately their card, and this has become the ritual in the West when two artists meet. You know, you give each other a book, and then you don't read it, and you go to an artist's house, and it's full of the same artist books that you've got. You know,
yeah, that's a nice thing. It's a visual. I mean, usually, what do you do with business cards any day nowadays? As you, yeah, you have it anyway in your phone, and you can exchange it via phone, and you never see the business cards of the other people. But with the books, it's different, and there's this ambiguity. You might have been so insane to actually buy this, to actually have bought these books.
But I mean, the thing with Akonchi, what really interested me about what he was saying isn't even the idea of space, but it's just that the fact that art, for him, became the arena within which he could fully kind of expandedly play out a set of literary concerns. Literature, or at least a kind of mainstream realist central market kind of version of literature, the type of, the literature as defined by the publishing industry wasn't the place where he could play out these eminently literary concerns. The art world was. And that's something I found to be very true in my own case. Whether the end product is an artist's book, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know what an artist's book is, as opposed to a novelist's book. I mean, I take all the points Angus was making about the self-reflexivity of artists' books, but as you were saying that, I was thinking, well, Don Quixote, I mean, Tristram Shandy. No. I mean, they are incredibly self-reflexive.
Yeah.
The question of authorship is continually being undermined within them, especially in Quixote. I mean, we have these manuscripts circulating and being read by the characters. I mean, it's utterly... I mean, is that an artist's book?
No, I don't think so. And there are lots of even mainstream books that have it nowadays. I mean, this kind of, and imagine, and you see it as well interesting. I don't read all these books, but I always see when I take a long distance flight, there's in the last few years, really every time, and it's like every month, every second month, there is a new international, like American movie about an author in a crisis who then encounters usually a love interest and then somehow overcomes this crisis. But this kind of the author in a crisis, and of course it's meant to be autobiographical. It's became so fashionable. It's amazing. This kind of an author reflecting his own production, the circumstances of his production, the question whether he is, yeah. I think when we were just talking a few minutes ago, and you said the art world is more like, the literary world is humanistic.
Yeah, this is the essential thing. This is the way I see it. That Lindsay was saying a moment ago, about, making the point about our subjectivity not being inherent but produced by the networks of exterior networks, contingencies of language and politics and history and technology and so on. I mean, this is a counter-humanist position, and it's right. I mean, there's no two ways about it. That is the right position, and it is a position that has been adopted and kind of you know, integrated over the last 100 years at least by the art world. I mean, it's the default position of you know, of someone who's come through the institutions and the academies of the art world is to know that. You know, you've read your Barthes, you've read your Derrida, you've read your Foucault. That's just the default position. And so art always involves a critical self-reflection about one's own medium and the problems within this, and so on and so on. Whereas for the I don't want to say the literary world, the world of mainstream fiction has exactly the opposite position. It has a humanist position. So to write within this kind of world is to express yourself, your sovereign, you know, self, which is authenticated by its feelings and emotions and spiritual whatever, you know. This is the wrong position. This is a reactionary, dumb position, and this is the position that kind of dominates the world of mainstream literature, or mainstream publishing at least. But the paradox for me is that even before the art world knew the counter-humanist position, literature knew it. This has always already been the default position of literature, you know. And so it seems to me, this is the paradox, the art world has become fundamentally a much more literary space than the world of official literature, if you like.
What do you think? What is the reason for that? Why is the art world better?
I just don't know. I just don't know. I mean, I think things move in cycles, you know. If you look at kind of mid-century France, all these people, you know, like Lévi-Strauss or Foucault and Derrida and Deleuze and, I mean, Barthes, all these people, Lacan, who 100 years earlier would have become novelists. They would have been Flaubert and Balzac. You know, they became philosophers and anthropologists and psychoanalysts because that's where the action was. It just, you know, it just happened to fall that way. And in Western Europe, I mean, in London and elsewhere over the last 20 or so, 30 years, the action has been within the art world. The art world has expanded and all these things, you know, it's expanded to kind of, people want to go there. The people that 50 years ago would have become writers, I think, have now become artists. I mean, almost all my friends are artists, and they're all voraciously reading Beckett and William Burroughs and, you know, and then and Alan Rob Greer, making artworks based on this. This is an interesting kind of, you know, what you call it, a kind of migration. I don't think there's any essential reason why it should be that way. Maybe in another 30 years, everyone will be a filmmaker, you know.
Oh, this is what yeah. I think the reasons don't have to be essential, but there are reasons. And one reason is that the novel has been so enormously successful and hasn't really been tested, even today. I mean, of course, you could always argue that the art world has been tested by photography, and this was a fundamental crisis. And this kind of replication of turning world into narratives, like an automatic narrative coming, like this kind of reproduction is still not possible. It might be very soon, and when you talk about 30 years, maybe it's not even 30 years, because there are already they are already working on, I mean, when talking about the economic world, Forbes is doing a lot of reports with software. There is no one writing it anymore. A lot of articles on sport. You know, you can already write about a match on, I don't know, baseball match. A machine can do it, and it's like, okay, you know, it's not. You read it and you think, this is like, I mean, it's not great, but it's fine. So this might come really soon, and of course, this would really test a lot of writing that is going on. There was more. It would put the writers more in an identity crisis of where to go.
I think you see that. I mean, David Foster Wallace's last unfinished book is very kind of interesting in this respect, because it's about exactly this. I mean, you know, the characters are accountants, but this is a kind of sleight of hand. They're actually writers. I mean, they have to give an account from all this data. They're overwhelmed with financial data, fiscal data, and they have to sift through it and produce, you know, the narrative strands that we call, you know, tax returns. I mean, it's their blatant stand-in for the novelist, and the question he's asking himself, really, and failing to answer, I mean, he kills himself halfway through writing the book, is, you know, how do you write now in an age of data saturation? I mean, it's this complete sense of the redundancy of the figure of the novelist, which you know, comes out of that book. But again, you know, I think that sense of redundancy goes right back to the origins of the novel. You know, I mean, the novel has always been confronting the fact of its own impossibility and the fact of its own redundancy. I mean, you know, again, we come back to Don Quixote or something, which is about exactly this. It's about the fact that books don't work. You know, here is this guy that literally, he wants to be in a book. He wants to, Quixote starts out wanting to be a writer, but then he thinks, no, actually, I've got to go one step further than that and enact in the world these kind of narrative moments and with farcical results. And then the people trying to treat him go to his library, and he's got this huge library of all this kind of Borgesian thing, of all the other books, and they start burning them, and then they don't burn some of them. And I mean, it's the same question, basically. The end of the book.
And you can do great books with it.
Yeah, exactly. The end of the book has always been the possibility of the book.
This is the enormous success of fiction writing, the possibilities as well. When Lindsay was talking about self-reflection, and she made this mouth photography, but of course in other ways, of course, you write, and there's the self-reflection is immediately there, and this is, of course, giving you this this illusion of authenticity, is because you can reflect your inabilities. You know, so you think you have a second level authenticity. It's not this kind of naive. I guess no contemporary writer would be that naive. I mean, this is me, and you know, you always reflect your inabilities, but in a really lame way, and in a very humanistic way. You think that by doing this, then at least then you reached some core identity. I mean, the core identity might be this inability, but it's still a core identity. It's not.
What you're saying, this is what is expected of you when you write, or?
Yeah, and there is I have always been avoiding to write explicitly about sex in fiction, and and in many other respects trying to avoid. And this is my problem in the literary field, anything that in some sense might appear to be autobiographical. And people hate this. This is what they really, 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 really hate. And it's always, I mean, and that's, a proper reader is exactly asking, so, and where is you in the novel? No?
This is why I mean, every time you know you go and try and. This is why you can talk. Well, I hope interestingly, it interests me. I mean, you can talk in an interesting way about literature in an art space or in an academic space, but in a This is exactly what I found when you know, do an interview on the BBC or whatever, and they just want to know about you. They say, "Where are you in this book? How much did this happen to you? And you know, what are you trying to express?" So, you know, it defaults again to this kind of humanistic, you know, impasse.
I came up with a friend on the idea of doing a novel on a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, a German soldier wounded back home. And we knew if we would pretend that the author is an actual soldier, this book would have become a major success. you all would know by now about this book. It would have sold because it was really provocative. The issues it was dealing with at that time in Germany, no one had been reflecting really on this German mission in Afghanistan, which is kind of unique after Second World War of German disengagement internationally. And then we did the most horrible thing, not just that we claimed it was us who had written it. I mean, our names were on the... It's that we were not just one author, but two. And it was really interesting later on. Literary Critique told me that she had actually tried to put it on a shortlist for a German book prize because she thought it's a great book. And the other people in the jury said, no, it's impossible because there are two writers, there are two authors of a book. And so, who is the author? And they were serious about it. This was their concern. They didn't even read the book. It was not about the book. It was just about the fact. And when you look at the whole history in Germany and in general, I mean, the Nobel Prize in physics or chemistry is always given to a collective nowadays. Yeah, and then there was the headless thing, and it's something unthinkable. There are art collectives. There is no writer collective of any. As soon as you write, as there is more than
Wu Ming, as Angus said, the Wu Ming group, the kind of Luther Blissett, collective is getting some attention.
But I don't know of any any like major art prize or anything given to more than one person.
So so you started publishing with Surkamp, right? Or it was a Random House.
There was another one.
Yeah.
There was another one, Berlin Verlag, yeah, Random House, then Surkamp,
and then more recently you've done all this stuff with Sternberg.
I still do. I do still publishing with.
So what dictated? What made you move from the one to the other?
I don't know if I really moved from one to the other. So I started doing Sternberg is a publishing house mainly for art theory. They do some catalogs, but mainly it's art theory, and they got interested into novels and fiction writing just by, I think, by a personal interest of the publisher, and as well knowing that there are books by artists or art critics as well. They I
mean the book,
and then but what started in the Solution series that David mentioned in the beginning, the first book in the series I had been publishing in Germany first with Surkamp, but doing the whole series was something unthinkable, and it was from the beginning an international series. So I would invite other people to write. I would write as well, coming up with solutions for different nations. Momos, who will do a performance later on, did 2 books in the series. We have books, that are more like fiction. Others that read like political essays. But in any case, it's this kind of exaggerated gesture of having ideas how to solve problems of a whole nation. Yeah, at times when the nation as a concept is in a general crisis anyhow, and might be something that, or you would usually assume that it's something that is unsolvable anyhow.
I like the idea of drills that you came up with. I mean, it seems this is a very Oulipo thing, right? You create a bunch of constraints. You call them drills, like a military drill or like a kind of exercise routine, and you prescribe these to people. And one of the drills you came up with was, live a year as though it was your final year. I mean, seriously, as though you were going to die at the end of it. And then you write the kind of, the drill. Prescription, rules, and then you got this guy Eric Needling to actually live like that. So he kind of becomes your character, within this fiction. But then, of course, what's actually published is his diary and a quite documentary. And he goes to all these war zones, and I mean, it's a kind of very interesting model, because it is a fiction basically, but it's real as well.
Yeah, I would go back a little bit to the solution series, and what happened is, and then we are going back to Vito Conti, because the problem is with this kind of writing solutions for nations. I realized, I mean, I thought this is what I'd been doing for Germany. This is phenomenal and quite something. Friends had the same opinion and were really intrigued by some of the solutions. But we all knew, and there were a couple of people that, yeah, outside of such an art context where you would kind of think this is something nice and charming, people would just be irritated by it, would find it completely ridiculous and don't take it seriously. So this is the reason, not because I'm so fascinated by space. I'm actually not. I'm not fascinated by architecture at all. I feel kind of rather threatened by it, of actually being concerned with how to build something and so on. We came up with the idea of making one of the solutions real, and that was the Great Pyramid Project. I think this is a tomb, a collective tomb, a mass tomb for potentially all people on Earth. Everyone can be buried there. Every stone of the pyramid is one tomb, and it's an infinitely growing structure because the pyramid is so solid and so easy to put on another layer.
But then you went and bought some land somewhere in Eastern Germany.
We didn't
started building this pyramid.
We proposed
had local people protesting against it, saying we don't want 1 million dead people in our backyard.
We made an architectural competition. The competition was in the jury. It was the jury was Rem Koolhaas, Mucha Prada, and so on.
Funding from the European Commission on something.
So there started an actual controversy about this on all levels, political levels. We got into architectural magazines, thinking we made such a smart campaign of making things real. They took it very serious on this level. We got into magazines for funeral culture because they thought they took it seriously as a potential way in the future to have a place, a cemetery that is international, that is no longer just restricted to one region, one religion, and so on. So a lot of things happen. We still haven't realized the project, but yeah. And since then, there's this idea of how making things real, and this is, I came up with this ideas of drill, and then Eric Niedring, the artist, said, okay, I'll actually try and do it. I will live 1 year as though it were my last.
Because with the Pyramid Project, I mean, the analogy, when I first came across that, I thought, okay, this is as though, there's a Borges story I think it's called The Lottery in Babylon, and he imagines a lottery where you don't just win some money, you can lose as well. You can be killed. If you get a bad ticket, you have to go to the office and they kill you. But if you get a good ticket, you become a millionaire. But imagine if Borges, instead of writing this story, had gone to the Argentinian Lottery Commission and said, look, I've got this idea. Can we actually do it? And persuaded them somehow to, or at least started that process. That's kind of what you're doing with the Pyramid Project. I mean, it's still fiction. I mean, it's a proposition. It's a speculative proposition. And it plays out through certain, networks which are ultimately textual, the media, writing, communication networks, and yet it's kind of, it's a kind of expanded, could we call it expanded fiction? I mean, so just to go back to Don Quixote yet again, I mean, this is what's at stake there. This guy reads a lot of books with stories, and then he somehow thinks it's not just enough to be a reader or even a writer. You've got to do it. Yeah, you've got to kind of unpack this into a real space. I mean, Don Quixote goes and actually enacts you know, page 273 of Don Belianos of Greece or Don Palmerin of England. He's going to, you know, like Hong Kong Phooey in the cartoons. He gets out his book and goes, I'm going to do that bit where he charges at the knights, and he gets it wrong and he falls off his horse and they beat him up. And but it's the same kind of thing about somehow unpacking what still remains a fiction, but into a larger, you know, seeing your palimpsest as a kind of larger, you know, bigger than the object of a book.
And I think this is what, with the last year project of Eric, happened involuntarily with your book Remainder. I mean, this can happen to you as well. Some people might be familiar with Wolfgang von Goethe's book Werther. It's a romantic love story, and at the end,
Sorrows of Young Werther.
Yeah, he is the guy. The Werther is killing himself, and suddenly became really fashionable to kill yourself, you know, and exactly in that way, in that manner, because of being, of being terribly lovesick, and so this can happen to a book even without you wanting it. I mean,
yeah, but nobody's hijacked a plane and flown it in a figure of eight until the fuel runs out. Yeah.
But what Eric and I knew when he got the idea was actually living 1 year as it were his last. I gave him your book Remainder because it's about a guy who tries to reenact events, and then as well as very into architecture to make these reenactments as authentic as possible, and of course in a way failing with this, but still this whole task of dealing it, how he does it, how approaching this, it's so beyond what is going on in the art world nowadays, but it could be possible.
Oh, but hang on, while I was writing that book, I mean, this was, you know, I was writing it in 2000, 2001, and around that time I came across and ended up becoming friends with quite a few artists who were doing exactly that. Rod Dickinson, Jeremy Deller, you know, Ian Forsyth and Jane Pollard, who were all about, you know, reenacting the Battle of Orgreaves, the last Cramps concert.
Yeah, of course. I went to the Battle of Orgreaves and was really impressed by it, but at the same time I thought your book is going one step further, as well with like the personal commitment to it.
Well, yeah, because he goes to the point of actually killing everyone. I mean, which you know Della couldn't do in the Battle of Orgreaves.
And as well, when just building this house, his idea is the sense of precision. It's quite something. So and Eric got completely fascinated by your book, and so everyone, like his assistant and so on, everyone had to read the book. And when he started the year and said, look, I mean, this is what I'm doing now. It's, you know, I have only this 1 year and I really want to do everything. And this is, you know, look at my list, at my bucket list. It's endless. And I have exactly this amount of money. Unfortunately, not the 8.5 million your protagonist has to make it all happen. And yeah, this was quite interesting, and which leads me, all these experiences with the Great Pyramid and with the last year, through this I realized that the art world is full of the belief in authenticity as well. Yeah, just as much as the literary world.
Really, I don't see it that way.
No, just in a different way, because the art, in the literature world, you still want to see it in the product. You want to see it in the book. While in the art world, it's somewhere.
It's the authenticity of the network, the authenticity of...
Yeah, of the network, of knowing someone in person, of... I think there is a... and of the procedure. So the authenticity, what I think is people are more aware of the whole process of doing something, which is, with a writer, it always is a mystery. I mean, how did you do it? In the end, it's always the same. You know, you don't see any production in this. You always have just lines. It's kind of magic. You know, they just appear, and you can say, okay, of course, there's as was a question always, but how did you do it? And then you say, do you have a routine? You know, that's a very popular question as well. At least I get asked very often. How do you do it? Do you write in the morning, in the afternoon? How many hours? But the answer can never be fulfilling. Never.
Well, it's very boring. You open a laptop and you know.
Yeah.
So when William Burroughs was asked for advice, you know, he would just say, "Learn to type." That's it.
No, I recently had an idea for, it could be a great web TV series that would show someone writing in real time. You know, you would just have the screen and seeing someone writing a complete novel. It never happened. I mean, and it could be endless. And if, in case this is still too bizarre, you could think of having two people writing something together. So they would talk about it. One would be typing. I mean, as I did.
There was something at the Serpentine a few years ago as part of it, where 5 or 6 writers were kind of writing in real time. The idea was that we'd be in the gallery, but then we all said, well, actually, we can't, because like you can't write if there's people around and friends come by, and you know you can't write. So they agreed that we'd be at home and there'd be a screen in the gallery, and we'd each have a 3-hour window to write, and then it would pass on to the next person. And I didn't even write anything. I just made a lot of notes, and that's what went on the screen. Yeah, I think another gallery had some kind of celebrity writer sitting in, Will Self or someone sitting in the Whitechapel for a day. Doing whatever he does.
Doing it for a day. But imagine a whole book, and you really have to finish it. I mean, you cannot, you know, detour and just scribble some notes, but actually do the writing. Or imagine 2 persons writing a script, which is kind of, there's a tradition of collective writing, so they could discuss everything in real time. And I actually proposed it to a person who has been producing web TV series, and he said, "Oh, this will be terribly boring. I mean, we will probably have boring." Yeah, but that's something. I mean, that's not a reason not to do it. At least not. So again, maybe it's rather an art project than something for for the literary world. But I could imagine that, you know, it could become something. I mean, imagine. You would still have the whole writing process of something. I mean, I would be terribly ashamed. I couldn't do it, probably. I mean, with my wife looking at my screen, I mean, and I get like, I shout, and no, you cannot look at all this, like, I think it's horrible.
But I mean, that's almost like a reduction to the absurd of what writing is. I mean, literally just the act of sitting at a desk. And I mean, you know, when Lindsay was talking about her work and the stories, you know, the fictions maybe around it, and saying that usually after she gives a talk, the first question is which bit is true and which bit isn't. And then she mentioned Joseph Beuys, and of course his work is always seen in the context of this fantastic story about being shot down and having the rabbit fat rubbed on him by shamans and so on. In fact, the first few times I saw Beuys's work, I think the wall text in the gallery produced that story as absolute fact. And I'm still not clear whether he even was in a plane or not. I mean, but the point is, you know, both Beuys's work and Lindsay's work is, I mean, the objects take their place within a fiction. I mean, that's the frame around them. What kind of infuses them with meaning is this overarching fiction. I mean, that's kind of interesting. You know, what's the relation then to bookness within that? I mean, in Lindsay's project, there is a book, but the book isn't really a codex then. It's just another thing. So like another object, another photo, another narrative that perhaps we read, perhaps we don't. But the fiction in that work is not in the book, is it? It's this more expanded thing about the Caribbean and stepbrothers and stepsisters and ancestry and I mean, that's the bigger book, right?
Yeah, I think the awareness of this book has become enormously fashionable, and it's so.
Of what book? What, of the big fiction book?
Yeah,
or the little book?
of everything is fiction anyhow, and when you produce fiction in a more conscious way, then it's somehow assumed to be better. Suddenly, I mean, I get these invitations from different fields, from urbanists, from architects, and they believe in fiction, in the business world, of course, storytelling, and so on. So they think fiction is somehow better than fact, because facts are fiction too, but they have no self-awareness of being fiction, and they think it's a great tool. And of course, you don't need a lot to do it. You know, this kind of the simplicity of fiction. I don't know if this is maybe this is very personal impression, but I encountered everywhere that people talk about fiction and want to do something about fiction.
Sure, there's a kind of, yeah, I get those invitations, like some kind of urban think tank or whatever, they think they should have a writer on board to help them think about town development and how do we imagine, you know, this, and I've never actually accepted, well, maybe it would be kind of interesting to do that. But I'm still kind of interested in this, you know, to come back to, I'm kind of obsessed with Mallarmé at the moment, like which is like a Conchi, why I haven't written anything in 4 years. But you know, his famous line is from his essay, the book Spiritual Instrument. He says everything that exists in order to end up in a book, to end up as a book. He envisaged this. I mean, it's very kind of, in a way, it kind of anticipates digital culture. You know, the Googleplex, everything in the world, its destiny is to end up as the book. He had this idea of the book to come, that the massive, the total book, that for him wouldn't even be a book necessarily. I mean, he had these ideas that the book would kind of expand. It could be, bits of it could be enacted. It might become like a religious cult or a political movement, like early Christians in the catacombs of Rome. You know, book lovers would meet and kind of do a bit of the book and bring the book forwards towards its full gestation. But the idea was that ultimately the book would appear and it would be everything, and everything would be in the book. He also said that the book requires the complete disappearance of the writer in order to realize itself. This ties in with what Angus was saying. So this is kind of really interesting. I mean, and he tried to write the book. I mean, in a way, that poem, A Throw of the Dice, painting manifestation, or whatever it is, that piece, A Throw of the Dice, was a stab towards the book, and it was a failure. I mean, he said, this is not the book, this is an outlining of, this is a failed attempt to move in that direction. Then, okay, maybe Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake is the book, but it's not. I mean, the book is, this is Blanchot's whole take on Mallarmé, is that the book is always to come. It's never realized. It's always to come. But the kind of the condition of its, and it's an impossibility as well. But the condition, that the kind of demand of the book is the demand that shapes the parameters of literature, of serious literature. This is the kind of impossible demand that we're faced with. Bookless.
So how do you do it or don't do it?
To some extent, allegorize that impossibility. That's one way of thinking about it.
So what would you be your allegory of this?
Well, I'm working on a novel at the moment where the narrator, whose name is just U, like the letter U, after Ulrich in Musel, but it's just U. He's an anthropologist. He's meant to be writing the great report. He's a corporate anthropologist, and he's meant to be writing the great report on our era, like doing, you know, to our age what Levi-Strauss does to the Amazonians. And of course he can't, you know, because it's unwritable. Or if it has been written, or maybe it's being written by, you know, networks of kinship to being mapped on Facebook. They don't need anthropologists. I mean, literally, every time you go on Amazon or whatever, your every keystroke you made, every kind of angle of who you know and what you like is being done by software. But who can read that? You know, it needs another piece of software to read this. I mean, this is the kind of the problem. I mean, this is a modern kind of incarnation of that problem. It's not a new problem, but
this is exactly why fiction is becoming so popular. And when thinking of anthropology or think of Freud or what he did, I mean, nowadays you wouldn't. This is not hard science. So what do you do with this? I mean, there's more and more hard science, or these like hard facts are covering more and more space. So so where you go? So this is where fiction comes into place. And
Freud's great realization was that you know, if you want to understand what used to be called human psychology, which is a word he hardly ever uses. If you want to understand subjectivity, you don't cut up someone's brain. You don't even kind of study a group of people in a room. You read Antigone, you read Hamlet. I mean, and you read Sophocles. You know, yeah, but it's a completely literary understanding of reality, basically, that Freud is proposing, and it's completely contrary to the kind of positivism of neuroscience. I think one of the great intellectual follies of our era is this kind of idea that neuroscience can explain. You know, you take a biopsy of Shakespeare's brain and you understand Hamlet, or you put some electrodes in David Lynch's hair and you understand Inland Empire. I mean, it's kind of idiotic, you know.
But this is where the belief in fiction and storytelling comes in, and in New York, these storytelling events, they are so enormously popular.
What storytelling events?
It's more about, again, there was authenticity. I think they're telling something about their life to other people. So it's this kind of going back to the cave thing. But in New York, and people queuing, it's like, the queues are a couple of 100 meters long for the most popular storytelling events. It's enormous. And you can then use it for everything. I mean, that's the interesting thing. This kind of gift is you can use it for dating. So there's already storytelling events specialized on dating. So how you propose, I mean, you offer yourself by telling a story.
But these stories, are they real? Is it like Alcoholics Anonymous, where people stand up and give an account of themselves, or do they tell a story about a princess in a tower? Or
they have an anonymous audience, and I think it's the same as with fiction writing. You know, the audience assumes that a lot of it is real, but I mean, like with boys, you don't know. Huh? And I think there must be a lot of invention. It's not like I guess there are some people who try to talk really accurate. I didn't go there because they're so popular. It's really difficult to get in, and I don't want to queue for a couple of hours. But yeah. And I guess it's not so important if they're true or not. And because then you have this like more artistic, the art world authenticity, which is going up stage and telling and choosing a story and telling it. I mean, this is so much authenticity anyhow, then it's not so important if the story is real or not.
Do people want to, should we open up this?
Let's see if anyone has a question or wants to add something. No, maybe I do. Well, thanks first of all for such a fascinating talk. There were so many things, I don't know where to start with, but there was something because yesterday when we spoke about the structure of the symposium, we said that we would move from the space of the page to the space of the art project that surrounds the book. And then you were talking also about, in spatial terms, also of literature, starting with Vito Conci, who moved from poetry, visual arts, then architecture. And then it makes me think also of the movement from fiction to fact, from literature to architecture, and then you were speaking about realizing the pyramid project is a realization of a fictional project. And then there was this question that came through. But for example, okay, my question is, what would that add? I mean, if you do like Don Quixote, try to reenact a fiction, in the book you see that it fails, but actually it's still a fiction. Don Quixote didn't actually exist. I mean, for example, would it make sense to reenact the story of Remainder, like to really actually buy a building and have the actors in reality make an art project of it? Would it add anything to the fiction? Because your question was fiction is better than fact.
If they just did it as a performance, it wouldn't be interesting at all. I mean, this is why I wrote the book. When I had the idea for Remainder initially, I mean, exactly like in the book, I was looking at a crack in the bathroom wall. I had a moment of deja vu, and I remembered, even though I knew it was never real, that this building and the cats on the roof and the smell of liver and the piano music. And my initial thought was, oh, I'll make an art installation and reconstruct that. But then I thought, well, so what? I remembered something, and here it is. I mean, that's not very interesting. I mean, it's only interesting if you can actually expand the limit of that space or of that kind of modality, whatever, infinitely, to the point even of death, to the point where you're making car crashes happen and people die. I mean, to the point of ultra violence. In fact, it's the same thing as happens to Ballard's Vaughan in Crash. I mean, he does the same thing. He starts reenacting car crashes he hires sports stadia, but then he says, no, I've got to expand this, and he's doing real ones. And in the end, he creates his own death crash with Elizabeth Taylor, which he gets wrong. It's brilliant. So he dies. He has his first actual accident, which is not just a controlled reenactment. So in a way, you know, if someone were to reenact Remainder, it would have to go to that point and beyond. I mean, it would have to be... I mean, I'm interested in these kind of Mark Chapman figures. You know, they read The Catcher in the Rye and go and shoot someone because everything else is phony. I mean, that's a quixotic reading. I mean, it's a misreading. He doesn't understand metaphor. He doesn't understand this kind of borderline between fact and fiction, if you like, but which is very porous anyhow, as we know. But it's a very interesting... You know, Florence Ray in the 90s in France read Bataille and went on a killing spree, basically, just like in The Story of the Eye. I mean, it's horrific, but it's something very interesting about that kind of that misreading, which is actually a quite faithful reading. I mean, it's very but yeah.
And then maybe now for Ingo, I would say probably you know the Museum of Innocence project in Istanbul.
Orhan Pamuk.
Orhan Pamuk.
You get a ticket with the book.
Yeah, actually he wrote the novel. He actually bought the building in Istanbul, and he created the museum that was, in principle, was fictional. And then I was thinking about it when you were speaking about the pyramid project, like. Then again, I was visiting the museum, and I don't know what would that add to the project, or I don't know. It's a question really, because that's again we are dealing again from the space of literature and fiction to the space of art projects, which are at the end of the day they are immersive experiences. Yeah, it's something that you experience in your whole body when you are in the space. Yeah. So do you think the pyramids project could actually happen, and what could that then be different from the fiction
it's totally
proposal?
viable, isn't it? I mean, it's actually quite a good idea. I mean, just from a very practical, ecological point of view, isn't it?
Yeah, for many reasons, that would be, of course, it would be completely new as well. major attraction, as a tourist attraction. It would mean a completely different way to say goodbye, kind of, and meet people there. Sometimes I think there's such an incredible amount of kitsch, that I would be the one who couldn't stand it. I mean, I would always be like, oh no, if it would happen, then I would have to either I would be lucky and no one would remember that I would have been the one who had the idea, because anyway, it's some sort of corporation, someone is just doing it. Someone in China is doing it. In China, they really have a space problem in the big cities. It's really necessary. It's in Europe, in a rather shrinking nation. It doesn't even make so much sense. But there could be need, and someone would just do it, and only few people would know about the origin of the idea, and then I would be fine. And otherwise, I would have to, I don't know, change my name and go undercover, and couldn't stand it. And really happy about the possibilities nowadays to delete news from your stream, so I could filter everything that has to do with pyramid, and and live in a world without the pyramid. I don't know, but of course it's super intriguing, the idea that it would happen. I mean, and it's definitely something beyond what I have done. This maybe shows the limits of me as a writer. Yeah, maybe others could do it, could do the perfect Great Pyramid novel. I didn't do it. I just wrote a few pages about it. But yeah, someone might have this imagination, and that's so good, and that's becoming like a Don Quixote, and then yeah, you don't need it anymore. But no, I'm not that writer. Yeah.
Speaking about Borges, he also has one of his stories is not actually a story, is a list of proposals for other people to develop a number of stories that he would never write, and he thinks, okay, maybe somebody else can. In a way, it's very generous, I think, to do something like this. Well, thank you very much, both.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Ingo and Tom.